So do you keep getting calf pain? Have you pulled your calf, you've rested for a little while, but after you've got back to running, the pain's come back again? Have you seen lots of physiotherapists, osteopaths, sports masseuses, sports therapists? You tried their massage, the stretching, the acupuncture, but despite what they do for you, nothing's helping. Now today I'm going to take you through a journey about what essentially causes recurring calf injuries, why yours specifically isn't healing, and how to assess some of the biomechanical deficiencies that may be contributing to that recurring calf strains or recurring calf pain that you're experiencing at the moment. First of all, I really want you to understand the importance of the calves when it comes to running. When we run, the calves are not only important in terms of propelling us forwards, but they also help us decelerate, which really helps with change of direction. And therefore, we need to make sure that when we do return to running after a calf strain, that the gastrocnemius, the soleus, the two big calf muscles, are capable of doing what we ask of them. And if they aren't capable, typically that's when we start to develop these recurring calf injuries. Now, there are two really important calf muscles. We have the gastrocnemius, which is that big muscle that you can see on the back of our calf, and we have the soleus, which is a deeper muscle, but actually a bigger muscle than the gastrocnemius. Now, the gastroc, or the gastrocnemius, is really important in terms of propelling us forwards. Now, when running, typically we put through anywhere from sort of 2 to 3 times our body weight through the actual gastrocnemius itself. And therefore, if we consider someone going for a 5-kilometer run, for example, where they will typically maybe sort of make impact with the floor through one limb anywhere from sort of 2 to 2,500 times, we're talking about quite a lot of load going through that gastroc. Now later on in the video I'm going to show you how you can self-assess the gastrocnemius to make sure that it has sufficient strength and endurance to tolerate these loads that we put through it. We then have the soleus, which in my opinion is probably the least appreciated, least trained and most ignored muscle in the human body, at least in the context of runners. Now the soleus is actually a crazy muscle. It can take anywhere up to 8 times our body weight when we're running. So let's say we take a 70-kilogram bloke. They're going for a run. Every single step they take, roughly anywhere from 500 to 550 kilograms of load is going through that soleus. That's a huge amount of load, especially when we're doing it thousands and thousands of times. So is it any wonder that after an injury, you've rested, you've had massage, acupuncture, you've done some stretches, you may have done a few calf exercises, but typically in my experience, when clients come to see me, they haven't done too much. When you go back to running, that calf will have deconditioned. It will have got even weaker than it was when it got injured. And therefore, it's no surprise that it might not be the first run, it might not be the second, but a few runs in, you start to experience that calf pain again. Now in physiotherapy, we have these things called red flags, and essentially it's a sign of a serious pathology. In the context of the calf, we have deep vein thrombosis and infections, things like cellulitis that we need to be aware of and rule out. If you've been on a recent long-haul flight, if for whatever reason you've had an extended period of immobility, you haven't really mobilized too much, if your calf is swollen, shiny, red, discolored, just doesn't look right, go to A&E, get them to assess, make sure that you don't have a DVT or an infection. If those things are ruled out, we can be quite confident and we can push forward with this being a musculoskeletal condition that you're struggling with. So why is your calf not healing? Typically, people presenting with recurring calf pain can think back, and it might be 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, even longer, to a specific event where they first pulled or strained or feel like they've torn the calf. And typically one of 4 scenarios ensues after that calf strain. Most people will rest for a little bit, wait till the pain's sort of gone day to day, walking around the house, there's no pain anymore, and then they'll try running again. Typically, and unless you've had a really low grade calf strain, typically the pain will present again maybe a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks further down the line, but typically it does come back again. Scenario 2 is someone's rested for an extended period of time, they've stretched during that resting period, the pain's gone away, they try running again, doesn't help, the pain comes back, then they'll extend the rest period, they'll double down on stretches, they'll go back out, again, pain comes back. Now the third scenario, typically people have tried a few cycles of rest then returning to running, no improvement, and then they'll go and see a physio or an osteopath or a sports therapist. The osteopath, sports therapist, masseuse, whatever, will do some massage, some dry needling, give some stretches out, maybe some very basic calf exercises, then they'll ask them to get back running gradually as the pain settles. Again, typically the pain presents, again, might be weeks, months, years later, but the pain does come back. Now the fourth scenario is a little bit rarer, but typically people who've had recurring calf injuries, they've rested, gone through all the rehab with the physio, they've gone back out running, they've really had quite an extended period of pain-free running as they gradually build up their intensity or the volume or the distance, and then they break down when they start usually hitting roughly the same amount of distances they were hitting when the calf was originally strained. Now, if we consider these 4 scenarios, there's a big sort of recurring theme there, and that's rest. Now, rest is important. When we've injured a tissue, we need to respect the healing process. And what we need to do in those early stages, that first day or 2, is definitely rest. Just don't do too much. Try and mobilise if you can. We need to, as I mentioned before, rule out the serious things. Try and do some gentle range of motion exercises. Don't push into any stretching at all. And just respect that initial couple of days healing process. But from sort of 48 hours onwards, we really need to start appropriately loading the calf. And this is where a lot of people go wrong. They typically will spend weeks and only start loading when the pain has gone day to day. But for some people, that can be 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks. And in that time, the calf, the gastrocnemius, the soleus, the muscles that I just mentioned have to tolerate a lot of load when we're running. Will decondition, they'll get weaker, less enduring, they'll get tighter. So we need to make sure that over that period of time, we are starting to introduce appropriate load. So I usually begin with isometrics, sort of 48, 72 hours in, some very low level isometrics, just getting a little bit of load through the tissue. It's not taking it through any range of motion, it's not going to cause any damage. It can sometimes have an analgesic effect where the pain will start to actually settle a little bit. And we're just trying to prevent atrophy of the muscle, so a reduction in muscle mass and reductions in strength. Now, typically, after about a week, the pain started to settle, and we can start going through some range of motion exercises. Depending on the client, I'll either start with things like a TheraBand just to start getting a tiny bit of load through full range of motion into dorsiflexion and plantar flexion, inversion, eversion. But as quickly as possible, I want to get them into standing and going through full range of motion under heavier and higher loads. This is all dependent and subjective, and it's specific to you as a client. So I don't want to give any sort of general advice at day 2, start isometrics, at day 7, start doing this, day 8, do this. Because it is dependent on you, your age, your sporting background, how many recurring injuries you've had. But typically, when the pain settled, if there's no pain with that level of exercise, so if you're doing heavy TheraBand resisted plantar flexion, dorsiflexion, and there's no pain with it, there's no pain the day after, it might be worth trying maybe some double leg calf raises on a flat surface. Again, if there's no pain while you're doing that, after a few days, there's no pain the day after, you can then go to single leg or add a deficit. But basically, we need to go through a graded exposure program. But the big thing that a lot of therapists miss, not just physios, sports masseuses, therapists, osteopaths, is bridging the gap between a strong calf and a calf capable of tolerating high impact sort of plyometric loads. And what we need to do at this point, usually sort of 2, 3, 4 weeks post injury, is introduce plyometrics, the ability to absorb force, to counteract force, to move in multiple planes of motion at different velocities in unpredictable situations. And that's where we miss as therapists the opportunity to expose the calf in a relatively controlled environment to high loads and prepare you to get back to running. And 9 times out of 10, when clients come to see me face-to-face or virtually one-to-one, when we go through their previous physiotherapy or their previous therapy or rehabilitation program, they're not put through these steps. Basically, when they're doing calf raises off the bottom of a step, i.e. they're going through a full range of motion, and they can do that for a few repetitions, it's a case of get back to running. And if you keep getting recurring calf pain, that's obviously not enough. We need to go a step further or multiple steps further to return you back to pain-free running or multi-direction sport. So a common question I get asked is, why did my calf get strained in the first place? And I always hold my hands up, Sam. There's no way I could possibly know years ago what was going on with your calf. But what I can say with confidence is there's generally 2 reasons. You were either doing too much too quickly, i.e. it was a load issue, or there was a biomechanical deficiency that meant the calf was probably being overloaded or was a little bit tight and was susceptible to a tear. So with these things in mind, it would be worth at this point going through a few basic assessments you can perform at home to make sure that biomechanically you're moving well and you've primed your lower limb biomechanics to optimally utilise the calf and not overload it. So the first thing I'd like you to look at is your ankle dorsiflexion, and to do that we're going to look at the knee to wall test. Now, the knee to wall test is probably one of the most researched orthopaedic or special tests that we do in musculoskeletal clinics. And it's a fact that limitations in ankle dorsiflexion not only can have impacts at the calf, but the foot, the ankle, the shin, the knee, the quadriceps, the hamstrings, the lower back even. So it's vitally important that we can optimize this range of motion. Now to perform this test, I want you to watch this next short clip.
From a kneeling lunge position, test the maximal foot-to-wall distance achievable while maintaining the ability to contact the wall with the knee and sustain heel-to-ground contact.
Now in terms of an actual score that we're looking for here, most runners require around 10 centimetres, well really at least. And we know that the further away you are from this, probably the more susceptible you are to injury. The second thing biomechanically I'm interested in, and all my clients go through these tests, are testing the two calf muscles. So the first one, the gastrocnemius, we're going to do the single leg calf raise test and standing. And if you watch this video, it'll talk you through how to do that. Now with this test, I'm looking for 30 relatively easy repetitions. If you can't do that, you've got a little bit of work to do, and the next video coming out in the next few days will show you how to progressively overload and strengthen and increase the endurance of that gastrocnemius. And the third test I'd like you to do is the soleus single leg calf raise test. Now, it's pretty much the same as the single leg calf raise test you've just done, except you're going to be laying on your back with your feet on the wall. Now, I'm looking for a similar amount of repetitions here, roughly around 30. But I also want you to sort of subjectively feel how the repetitions feel. Are they nice and smooth, or do they feel quite jagged, especially as the heel's coming back to the wall? And that could indicate a lack of control through that soleus. Now the fourth thing I'd like you to look at is your ability to create stability at the knee. Now this is vitally important in terms of transferring force from the foot into the knee into the hip. Now we all know that our glute muscles, especially our gluteus maximus, is a big, powerful, strong muscle, and its main job really is to extend the hip, which is to propel us forward. Now the other muscles that do that are the quadriceps, the front of the thigh muscles, and the calf muscles. Now if we think about the size of these muscles, it would make sense that it's the glute max that provides a lot of that force forwards. But if we are overextending the knee, or if we don't have the ability to control sort of extension of the knee, then we're going to bypass the glute because energy will be leaked and we'll just use the quadriceps of the calves. So we need to make sure that we can create that stability at the back of the knee to prevent that knee sort of locking back and pushing us forward. Now to do that, you can do a single leg bridge, and I'm looking for around 45 seconds here without any cramping, without any pain. Most people, when they first try this, will cramp up either in the calf or at the bottom of the hamstring. That's quite normal, and the next video that I'm going to be uploading in the next few days is going to show you how to progressively improve that ability to create posterior knee stability or back of knee stability.
I don't want your heels to be too far up and pushing up into this position, all right? So I want you to be as far, your feet to be as far as possible away from your hip, but enough so that you can lift your heels slightly off the floor, because you're pushing from your midfoot, which is just underneath where you tie your laces. All right, so I'm just going to show you from on my left leg. So to put more load onto the left leg, I'm going to raise my right knee towards my chest. I'm going to get a bit further away, and I'm going to build tension from the midfoot, and you can just see that my heel's slightly coming off the floor. Push into the floor, and then we're just pushing up, and then your hip is only slightly coming up off the floor, just enough for me to actually put my fingers, my hand underneath my hip. So I don't want it to be that high up. All right?
Now, if you've been through those tests and there was nothing really sort of standing out, you had good ankle range of motion, good endurance through the calves, you could hold that bridge for 45 plus seconds, then we may need to start looking at load in a little bit more detail. Now, when I talk about load, it could be really anything, but in the context of running, I'm going to look at total distance within a given week. Now, my experience in sport, we have GPS to track all this data, so the data comes through to a computer, anything that sort of red flaggy pops up and we can address it. But unfortunately, it's a little bit more difficult for non-professional athletes. So what it might be worth doing is thinking back to when that first calf injury happened, and then thinking back a few weeks before that. Was there a sudden spike in the amount of running you were doing? Did you go from sort of 10 miles a week to suddenly doing 30 miles? Tim Gabbett is a great researcher on what we call acute versus chronic load. And essentially, when we're thinking about load, we don't want to see huge jumps week on week. So typically, we look at 1 week versus the previous 4. So in the context of running distance, let's say you, in weeks 1, 2, 3, and 4, hit 10 miles a week. So on average, you've done 10 miles a week, 10 plus 10 plus 10 plus 10 divided by 4, 10 miles. But let's say in week 5, you actually hit 15 miles. Now most people won't sort of blink an eye at this. It's only a 5 mile increase, maybe over 2 or 3 runs. But if you're consistently running 10 miles and that's what you've become accustomed to, and then you suddenly jump up to 15, that's a 50% increase in your weekly load. Now, if you keep doing that, if you keep jumping up by 50% every week, that's a huge increase in your load, and your body just won't be accustomed to that. In the short term, for a week or two, maybe in a month, you may get away with it. You can't sustain those gross big increases in volume, and therefore we need to be monitoring that quite closely. Now again, I'll be releasing a video on this in the next couple of weeks in a bit more detail of how we can assess and monitor our own loading to make sure that we are staying within the realms of an appropriate jump in increase in intensity or volume, because the research does indicate anything above sort of a 10 to 15% increase a week makes you susceptible to future injuries. So if you found any issues there in terms of your biomechanics, or if you feel like you may have a loading issue, so make sure you subscribe. I'll be uploading those videos in the next few days, and if you've got any questions in the meantime, put them in the comments. I'm always around and happy to answer any questions.